Thor, concerned for the balance of the realms, sought to build amicable relations with powerful giants and invited them to a solemn feast. In attendance were not only those allied with the gods, such as the sea giant Aegea and the giantess Grit, but also those skeptical of the Asgardians, including the frost giant Gyroth and the giant king Thrym. Thor aimed for honorable dealings and peace with Thrym. The hall of Thor's home, known as Kraftheim, shone with dazzling light, on this day as bright as during a thunderstorm. Thor had his servants, led by Thjalfi, pour plentiful beer and clear mead for the guests. Within Thor's hall, which counted 540 rooms, a grand feast was held. Loki, the trickster, keenly observed the guests. Balder, the peacemaker, sat by Thor's side advocating for the balance between the various realms. The blind Hod, who was often found in Balder's company, was also present. Some of the Asgardians mingled among the giants, pouring mead for Thrym and other mighty giants. Due to the loss of Tyr's oath hand, the balance of laws in all realms was in jeopardy, and the goddesses tried to prevent further calamity. To everyone's relief, discord was avoided, and the giants appreciated Thrym's peacefulness. Late into the night, the feast came to an end with the guests in a cheerful and boisterous mood. The next morning, Thor woke early and searched for his hammer. He felt once, then twice, but the spot was empty. Thor sprang up, shook his red beard, and gripped his hair in furious anger. A cunning giant had seized the opportunity of the feast and Thor's inattention to steal Mjölnir. The disappearance of the hammer would surely call into question Thor's recklessness, he thought, as he sought out Loki. "My hammer has been stolen," he revealed. Loki, who had caused the Asgardians enough trouble in the past, now saw an opportunity to settle his debts. They rushed to Freya in the Hall of the People and told her of the theft of the hammer. Thor asked for her falcon feather cloak to aid in the search for Mjölnir. "You could have it, even if it were made of gold," Freya generously said, handing him the feathered cloak. The mission intrigued the adventurer Loki. He slipped into the feather cloak, which rustled as he ascended. With powerful wing strokes, he took to the sky and flew over Asgard and Midgard until he finally reached Utgard. Loki circled tightly over Thrym's hill until the giant king finally finished his work on the golden necklaces and turned to his favorite horse. Then, Loki flew purposefully toward him and landed elegantly in front of him. "I have hidden Mjölnir deep in the earth. No one will ever retrieve it unless Freya becomes my wife," Thrym replied. After these words, Loki gave new strength to his feather cloak and soared over the land of the giants, back to Thor. Thor was already standing expectantly in front of his dwelling and called out to Loki, "Report to me from the air, for he who sits often forgets what he's heard, and he who lies down becomes comfortable and inclined to untruth." Loki landed and unfolded his feathers. "Thrym has the hammer," he explained breathlessly. "He's hidden it deep in the earth, and he demands Freya as his wife if we ever want to see Mjölnir again." Thrym had hidden the hammer and was demanding Freya as his bride. Other giants had also tried to win Freya for themselves, but Thrym was the most powerful among them, and a king at that. Despite the gravity of the demand, Loki and Thor saw no other way to retrieve Mjölnir than to comply with the giant's request. They went to Freya and told her of Thrym's condition. Thor asked the esteemed goddess to put on the bridal gown and travel with him to Thrymheim. However, Freya was outraged. Her anger was so intense that the whole hall trembled, and her precious arm jewelry fell to the ground. "I would have to be mad to go with you to the land of the giants," she exclaimed. Without Mjölnir, both Midgard and Asgard were in peril. If the giants attacked with the mightiest weapon, the Asgardians would face defeat. Therefore, all gods and goddesses gathered to discuss how to regain the hammer. Odin seemed at a loss until Heimdall, the wisest among the Asgardians, made a daring suggestion. "Why don't we dress you, Thor, in the bridal gown? We can adorn you with the giantess's arm jewelry, hang keys on your belt, and dress you in women's clothing." Thor trembled with rage, and his red beard quivered. "Dress me in a bridal gown? I would be mocked by both giants and dwarves." Loki interrupted him. "Thor, shut up. If you don't get the hammer back, the giants will invade our halls. Freya will then not only have to pour beer for the disgusting Thrym, but also become his wife." Odin added, "Do you really want to leave humans, your friends, unprotected?" Thor grumbled, shook his flowing beard, and finally gave in. Reluctantly, he allowed himself to be dressed in the bridal gown and arm jewelry. His hair was pinned up, and he was prepared as a bride. Thor swallowed his anger, along with a whole barrel of mead. "Never has a god been made such a mockery," he roared. "Let's pass by the river so that no one sees our reflections," suggested Loki, who had disguised himself as a maidservant to accompany Thor to Thrymheim. The two hitched the goats Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder to the wagon and thundered towards the land of the giants. Mountains broke, rocks ripped, and the earth burned under the wheels. They made more noise than the giants themselves. "Here, Freya is coming!" shouted Thrym, the king of the giants, when he heard the commotion. "Rise, decorate the hall for her reception." The giants laid precious rings and juniper branches on the benches. Thrym had valuable treasures, red and golden necklaces, even black-dyed oxen, and golden-horned cows. Only Freya was missing. Thrym prepared a lavish wedding feast, and had plenty of beer poured for the numerous guests. "How large and mighty is Freya, worthy of a giant king," marveled Thrym, "and how splendidly her jewelry glitters." Thor, disguised as Freya, struggled to suppress his rage. The plan had to work to get Mjölnir back, but how much longer could he maintain the deception? Thor held his breath and pressed his lips together. The disguise and veil just barely concealed his face and beard. In his anger, he ate 3 oxen, 17 geese, and all the pastries intended for the women. He also drank 3 barrels of mead. Thrym, amazed by the enormous appetite and thirst of the supposed Freya, couldn't hide his surprise. "Never has a bride eaten and drunk so much." Loki, disguised as a maidservant and standing next to Thor, quickly whispered, "Freya hasn't eaten or drunk anything for 8 days and nights. Such is her longing for you, King Thrym." Satisfied with the explanation, Thrym approached the disguised Thor and lifted the bridal veil. When he saw Thor's eyes, he jumped back in shock. "How terribly Freya's eyes glow," exclaimed Thrym. Once again, Loki, dressed as a nimble maid, came to the side of the bride and explained, "Freya has not slept for 8 nights. She longs so much for the wedding with you, Thrym." Thrym, already completely lost in his feelings, ignored the warnings of his companions and his sister. "Bring the hammer," bellowed Thrym. "Place Mjölnir in the bride's lap, as is customary." 8 giants carried in a wooden plank upon which lay Mjölnir. They placed the hammer in the lap of the bride. Thor could hardly believe his luck. With a smile, he lifted Mjölnir and swung it effortlessly through the air. The next moment, he threw off the veil and headgear, revealing his red beard. The giants tried to flee, but Loki had already locked the doors. Thor killed Thrym first, then his audacious sister. In his rage, he annihilated all the giants in the hall. With Mjölnir back in his hands, Thor and Loki returned to Asgard. However, the bloody wedding had ignited a deep hatred among the other giant kings and their followers, a hatred that would shape relations for all time to come.